Whether it's a roller coaster or a water slide, nothing gets your heart pounding like a high-octane theme park ride. But for all the seatbelts, lap bars, and warning signs, they're not always as safe as they seem. From poor maintenance and sheer negligence to utterly insane designs, there have been many rides that were just accidents waiting to happen. So it's time to buckle up and brace yourself as we take a look at even more theme park rides that had to be shut down. The Sand Blaster. Daytona Beach's Boardwalk is a famous Floridian amusement park, although one of its rides made national headlines for all the wrong reasons several years ago. The Sand Blaster, which was a fairly standard 53-foot steel roller coaster built back in the 1970s, had been operating on the boardwalk since 2013, but in June 2018, disaster struck when the coaster's front car suddenly derailed, throwing two riders 34 feet to the ground. That's like being shoved out of a 3-story building. Ouch! Miraculously, no one died. The incident immediately shut the ride down, and Floridian officials began to investigate. But what they found shocked them to the core. A little over a year before, inspectors assessing the ride had ordered it to stop immediately after finding not one, not two, but more than a dozen violations. These included damaged seats, excessive corrosion, and even a large crack in the track. These weren't things just a lick of paint could fix, so the ride was shut down for some serious maintenance and reopened 5 months later. But then, in May, less than a month before the accident, the ride failed its inspection again due to more excessive corrosion. After even more maintenance, another inspector gave it the green light to reopen. But just a few hours later, this terrible tragedy struck. Whoa, had that inspector been wearing a blindfold? Ultimately, the investigation revealed that the cars had been hitting the corners way too fast at a whopping 22 miles per hour, causing the derailment. To make matters worse, engineers also found evidence on the track that the Sand Blaster had derailed several times in the past without ever being reported to the state. The dark history and clear negligence the Sand Blaster boasted sealed its fate, and the ride was torn down in 2019. Shocking theme park incidents like these can make for pretty disturbing headlines when they occur, and, much like the news in general, put a damper on people's days. But luckily, there's a way to balance out the doom and gloom of today's news, all thanks to Daily Peanut. This innovative service delivers carefully curated news right into your email inbox every morning. Each news package from Daily Peanut pairs refined, high-quality updates on politics, tech, and other important topics with some lighthearted, humorous news stories, so you can look forward to reading the news, not dread it. With giggle-worthy stories such as Belgian farmer accidentally moves French border, Daily Peanut provides a tasty spoonful of sugar to help the news go down. Sign up for free with a link in the description below to join over 250,000 readers in being entertained and educated about the things that really matter. All done? Great! Now strap back in for more theme park rides that had to be shut down. The VORTEX. Thorpe Park likes to market itself as the UK's most thrilling theme park, and that's technically true. If by thrilling they mean terrifying, thanks to an accident that occurred there back in 2018. Their ride, the VORTEX, is designed to whirl riders around on a large mechanical arm that pivots on an axle. So, while they're being whipped around, riders are also swung side to side up to 65 feet in the air. Looks like the ultimate way to make someone dizzy. But back in 2018, it was the people watching the riders that felt sick. As the arm swung its screaming riders round, something huge suddenly ripped off the ride. It plummeted towards the riders on the downswing and, thankfully, missed them by mere inches. operators shut down the ride immediately, fearing that it could have been a piece of critical machinery and the ride might break apart above them any second. But on a closer inspection, they realized that it was just a piece of foam that had flown off one of the ride's seats that was out of order. Relieved, they performed a few routine safety checks before reopening the vortex just 15 minutes later. What a dizzyingly close call! The vertical accelerator. In 2019, two steely-nerved gents got into the seats of the vertical accelerator, a slingshot ride at Florida's Cobra Adventure Park. They were being recorded by their friends, who were teasing them about their upcoming 160-foot skyward trip.
You're gonna be screaming like sissies in about 10 seconds.
I'm not. About 3.
Yeah, you are.
Now, did anyone else notice how worn and stretched those cables on the left look compared to the right? Well, keep watching them, because just as the operator was about to pull the release lever, something truly shocking happened. That was one seriously close call. If that ride operator had noticed the shredding cord even a second later, those gents might have been flung to their deaths. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the ride was closed immediately. You'd think Cobra Adventure Park would have launched a full investigation into this near miss. However, they only released a statement claiming all their attractions, and I quote, always maintained the highest safety standards. I'm sorry, were they even watching the same video we just saw? Well, a quick glance on Google Maps shows that today, the vertical accelerator is still standing. Do you think this dangerous failure to launch was an acceptable accident, or should it have been shut down for good? Let me know in the comments. The Leap the Gap. The very concept of a track-jumping roller coaster is something that true adrenaline junkies dream about. But I'm sorry to say that such an insane-sounding ride doesn't exist, and probably never will, thanks to a little-known thing called physics. Because roller coaster trains don't have engines, they rely on a delicate and ever-changing balance of inertia, gravity, and energy to keep them rolling. So, without the track, they're completely unpredictable and uncontrollable. However, this limitation hasn't stopped people from bringing a trackless loop-the-loop to life with some top-tier visual effects. I mean, this clip looks so realistic, it actually went viral. But if it was real, the slightest breeze would knock that train off course and send it crashing to the ground. With all that being said, no one would ever be dumb enough to try and make a train-jumping track, right? Well, back in 1902, the Coney Island Cannon Coaster was originally going to include a track that genuinely jumped a gap. Trains would have been hauled up to the crest of a hill, rolled through a large cannon-shaped tunnel, and then propelled over a gap in the track at the end. This death-defying stunt was meant to make riders feel like they'd just been shot out of a cannon. While the track was built to spec, several tests done with sandbags resulted in a catastrophic number of crashes, and the idea was thankfully abandoned. The track was filled in, but at just 40 feet high with no real speed, the resulting cannon coaster was pretty boring, even by 1902 standards. This led to its closure a mere 5 years after it was built. Wow, what a misfire! The Tsunami. With a name like the Tsunami, you'd be forgiven for thinking this next ride was some sort of insane wave pool. But surprisingly, it was an inverted steel roller coaster based in M&D's theme park in Scotland. The ride had traveled around the country as part of M&D's carnival before arriving at the park back in 2004. Even though the 66-foot high coaster was well loved, it didn't have the best track record. In 2011, it broke down, leaving riders stranded 60 feet in the air for 8 long hours. They were eventually rescued by being abseiled out of their seats. As heart attack-inducing as it looks, that event paled in comparison to the disaster that occurred in June 2016. That afternoon, the Tsunami's yellow train was running along the tracks when suddenly the entire thing derailed. It struck a support beam at a shocking 40 miles per hour and plunged down 30 feet below, landing in a devastating heap in front of the ride. 2 adults and 8 children were injured in the crash, but despite the drastic scenes, no lives were lost. A health and safety investigation was launched into the devastating accident, but investigators weren't prepared for what they found. Repairs had been carried out on the axles of the passenger cars several days before. However, the welding metal that had been used was totally incompatible. This meant that when the train had entered a critical turn, the axles failed, derailing the entire thing. And to make matters worse, a ride inspector had approved the works just 16 days before the incident. In the end, the inspector was banned from working, the TSUNAMI was removed from the park, and M&D were fined just under $100,000 for health and safety breaches. It may not have had anything in common with a real tsunami, but this ride sure ended being one serious disaster. Is all this making you reevaluate going to a theme park ever again? Well, I know a place where you can be entertained without risking your life. Right here. Just hit those like and subscribe buttons down below, and you'll be the first to know when I've dropped an exciting new video. All done? Great. Now, what horror coaster do we have next? Hypersonic XLC. The Hypersonic XLC at Kings Dominion Amusement Park in Virginia had a bad reputation for having a 2-hour-long wait for a 10-second-long ride. But that's hardly fair. Technically, the ride was 20 seconds long. Using a prototype air compression system, riders were launched from 0 to 80 miles per hour in just 1.5 seconds, accelerating up a 165-foot hill before plummeting vertically down the other side. And, as this lady is about to demonstrate, it was just as fast as it sounds. Hope she liked her new hairdo. Opened in 2001, this unique prototype attraction became a seriously popular coaster. However, rumors began to surface that passengers who put their hands up at the start would frequently suffer from dislocated shoulders just from the sheer force of the launch. Apparently, this resulted in several lawsuits that were so damaging to Kings Dominion, the ride was forced to shut down for good in 2007. That's just 6 short years after it was opened. But here's the thing, I can't find any records of the lawsuits or even the injuries at all. It turns out the real reason the ride was shut down wasn't because it was dangerous, but because it was unreliable. Because it was a prototype, the ride had to undergo months of downtime every season for maintenance. Being a huge drain on the park's finances and resources, it was eventually put up for sale. But no other parks were willing to take on such a risk of a ride, and so it was dismantled and sadly forgotten. I don't know about you, but I preferred the dislocated shoulder explanation. The Emerald Plunge. The opening day of any amusement park usually has riders screaming in excitement, but the opening day of the Wave Water Park in Dublin, California left one rider screaming in pain. Back in 2017, a 10-year-old boy decided to try out the brand new Emerald Plunge slide, which dropped riders almost vertically down 48 feet onto a shallow pool below. He was well within the height and weight limits, but when he reached the bottom, he skidded over the water and was sent careening over the side onto the bare concrete. Ouch! I'd have been crying for my mommy. But this little legend got up and walked it off. Even though he wasn't seriously injured, the ride was closed just 90 minutes after it had been opened for the first time. Investigators were brought in to figure out what had gone wrong and sent a 78-pound sandbag, which weighed the same amount as the boy, down the slide. But when it hit the pool, they watched in horror as it too was sent flying over the sides. They concluded that a deep pool of water at the bottom of the flume caused a fast stop for lighter riders. This was a basic error that should have been picked up on during testing. The Plunge's manufacturer, Whitewater, insisted it undertook extensive testing on all of its rides, but the thorough investigation determined that was a huge lie. Not only that, but it also revealed they'd arbitrarily taken the height and weight restrictions from common roller coaster requirements without any proof they kept people safe on their slides. The boys' family filed a lawsuit and settled with the manufacturer, who begrudgingly took full responsibility. The slide eventually reopened in 2018 following some small water flow changes, and this time it managed to stay open for more than 90 minutes. Superman, Tower of Power. The thought of being thrown from a speeding roller coaster is scary, but it's nothing compared to what 13-year-old Caitlin Lassiter went through at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom. Back in 2007, Caitlin was getting ready to ride the park's Superman Tower of Power. It was a drop tower ride, which lifted riders almost 180 feet in the air before dropping them at a speedy 54 miles per hour. Just watching it is enough to make your stomach flip. But as Caitlin was being hoisted up, the ride jolted and she heard a sort of strange whipping sound. Suddenly, a cable that had been lifting the ride up fell on top of her, and part of it wrapped around her dangling legs. Terrified, the people next to her screamed at the operators to stop the ride, but it was no use. The car dropped, and the cables severed both of poor Caitlin's feet. She was rushed into surgery, and the doctors were able to reattach her right foot, but her left wasn't as lucky, and she was left with life-changing injuries. The ride was shut down, and after a thorough investigation, it never reopened. It turned out the faulty cable had gradually deteriorated over time, something that park inspectors had suspiciously never spotted. To make it worse, the 18-year-old ride operators heard the snapping noise and failed to hit the emergency stop button in time. If they had, experts believed Caitlin would have come away with just a few scrapes instead of 2 missing feet. All these factors fell firmly on Six Flags' shoulders, and Caitlin's family rightfully sued the park for negligence. They received an undisclosed settlement, which included around $500,000 in medical bills alone. Left without a leg to stand on, much like Caitlin, Six Flags demolished the ride before the start of the 2008 season. Ride of Steel. The Tower of Power isn't the only Superman-themed ride with a super villainous past. The Ride of Steel was built back in 1999 in New York's Darien Lake theme park, which is now also a Six Flags location. This megacoaster climbs up more than 200 feet and flies along the tracks at over 70 miles per hour, giving riders a real taste of what it's like to be Superman. Minus the bright red cape and underpants. However, back in 2011, chaos erupted shortly after Sergeant James Hackhammer, a courageous war veteran who'd lost both of his legs defending his country, boarded the ride. Sat at the very front, the train whipped around the track and was approaching one of the smaller hills when, suddenly, Sergeant Hackhammer was ejected from his seat. Sadly, he didn't survive, and the ride was closed indefinitely. An investigation found that in the Ride of Steel operator's training manual, it stated that all riders must have 2 functioning legs. This is because the T-bar ride restraints are designed to hold riders in at the hip and shin. However, even as Hackhammer's friends lifted him into the front seat, giving operators a full view of his handicap, they did not think to stop him from boarding. Rumors then began to fly that a park employee had told Hackhammer that he could get on any of the rides, but this turned out to be false. He'd actually been offered a brochure of safety information about the rides but had refused it, claiming he already had a copy. Ultimately, the ride was allowed to reopen, but the blame fell on Darien Lake's shoulders, and they ended up having to pay out an undisclosed 7-figure settlement. Although this wasn't the Ride of Steel's first time in the media spotlight. In 1999, a man weighing more than 300 pounds slipped from the ride's restraints and was thrown 10 feet to the ground. During an investigation, Darien Lake argued that the restraints worked as they were meant to, but they'd failed to engage properly because of his size. He was awarded $2.85 million in compensation, and the ride was started up again after more secure restraints were added to the trains. The Cyclone. The city of New York is home to Coney Island's Luna Park, one of the most famous amusement parks in the world. And right at its center lies the legendary Cyclone roller coaster. Opened in 1926, this iconic wooden coaster hauls riders up to the height of an 8-story building before letting them loose around hills and bends at a breathtaking 60 miles per hour. For almost 100 years, the Cyclone has been a local institution, even though it doesn't have the greatest safety record on track. Riders are only secured by a single lap bar, which is easy for some idiots to overpower or wriggle out from. Back in 1985, a man stood up on the ride for an extra hit of adrenaline, but accidentally hit a crossbeam and was sent tumbling to the ground below. Then, in 1988, a construction worker took a turn on the Cyclone and decided he too would try standing up as the train went down a steep hill. As you might have guessed, he was also sent careening over the side. Unfortunately, neither of these riders survived. But because these accidents were a result of their own actions, the Cyclone still operates to this day. But seeing the similarity of their idiotic choices, you'd think Luna Park would have refitted the trains with better restraints, right? Or at the very least, a mandatory IQ test. Well, instead of that, the park operators just painted a "Remain Seated" sign at the coaster's peak. Now that is health and safety at its finest. New Texas Giant. When the Texas Giant debuted in 1990, it set the astonishing record of being the tallest wooden roller coaster in the entire world. This beast was made with over 900,000 board feet of wood, making up its many heart-racing hills, drops, and vertical skirting turns. And at more than 140 feet high, with a top speed of 65 miles per hour, some of its drops were like falling off a 13-story building. As fun as it was, the wooden ride had a terrible reputation for being way too rough. This led to its renovation in 2009, and it was eventually reopened in 2011 as the aptly named New Texas Giant. It was all going smoothly until the events of July 2013. A larger lady was riding the Giant when, at the first steep descent, she tumbled out of her train carriage and fell a shocking 75 feet. Unfortunately, she didn't survive, and the ride was shut down pending an investigation. Safety experts questioned the ride's choice of restraint system, which only secured riders with a lap bar despite the high speeds and extreme turns. However, witnesses came forward claiming that before the train had left the station, the lady had alerted an attendant to the fact that her lap bar wasn't secured. Apparently, she'd only heard the latch click once, indicating that the mechanism hadn't locked properly. The attendant then performed a quick push-pull test on her lap bar, and despite her size and concerns, assured her she'd be okay. Hoo boy! Ultimately, the tragic event was put down to the victim's size and the attendant's error, not the failing of her restraints. As such, the ride was closed for just 2 months, but when it reopened, it had redesigned its lap bars and added in some seat belts. Now, larger patrons can ride without the fear of falling out, though whether they want to is an entirely different question. Flight Commander. It's no secret that Kings Island, Ohio doesn't have the greatest safety record. Since 1976, at least 7 people have lost their lives in the park. These incidents range from medical emergencies to lightning strikes, but one instance stands out thanks to the ride that was involved. The Flight Commander. Secured in little pods, riders were taken up to a height of 60 feet and whirled around by mechanical arms. Each pod was connected to a rotating section at the back, and through the use of a joystick, riders could spin their own pods a full 360 degrees. It was like controlling your own little spaceship. But in 1991, just a year after it opened, this spaceship fantasy came crashing down to Earth. A lady had boarded the ride alone, but somehow slipped out of her pod and frighteningly fell more than 60 feet to the ground. She sadly didn't survive, but the event had investigators scratching their heads. She'd been secured in with both a shoulder harness and a lap bar, both of which were found to be fully functional. So how on earth had she slipped out? After more investigating, it was then discovered that the woman had been heavily intoxicated, and that's when it all fell into place. It's believed that in her inebriated state, she fell limp, which, through a design flaw, allowed her to slide into the unoccupied seat beside her and wriggle her way out of the restraints. Maybe she was going to be sick, or perhaps she'd passed out entirely. Whatever the reason, it didn't end well for her. The ride was closed down, but it reopened in 1992 without any more incidents. Even so, the damage had been done to its reputation, and it was shut down for good just 3 years later. Thunder River Rapids. Just about everything in Australia is out to get you. The snakes, the spiders, even the theme park rides. Don't believe me? Well, just wait until you hear what happened on Dreamworld's Thunder River Rapids. It was a pretty typical river rapid ride with large circular rafts floating around a choppy water channel that were being lifted out of the water by a conveyor belt system. With a top speed of just 28 miles per hour, this ride was hardly a breakneck adventure. Although, it became one back in 2016. That day, one of the ride's essential water pumps failed, causing the water level to drop. As it did, a raft near the conveyor belts became stranded on the support rails and couldn't make it to the unloading area. But less than a minute later, another raft came speeding up behind them, crashing into the first raft and jolting the entire thing upright. It tipped out 4 riders, who were either terrifyingly trapped beneath the raft or against the moving conveyor belt. Horrendously, none of them survived, making this one of the worst theme park accidents in Australian history. A sweeping safety audit determined that the ride's safety and maintenance systems were rudimentary at best, and that a simple, inexpensive water level monitor would have prevented the entire disaster. This unbelievable oversight saw the ride demolished in 2018, and Dreamworld's parent company, Ardent Leisure, was fined a phenomenal $2.8 million for health and safety breaches. Crikey! Here's a quick shout out to YouTuber Cupcake S for suggesting the Thunder River Rapids in the comments of part 1 of this series. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. And if you know of any other rides that I haven't covered, tell me about them down in the comments below. Who knows, you might get a mention in part 3. Thanks for watching.